Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight, and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to dress it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And the Lord God said, It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him an help meet for him. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field, and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And Adam gave the name to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found an help meet for him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Ye hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam, and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat? And the man said, The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. And the Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And unto Adam he said, Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat of the herbs of the fields. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. And Adam called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Unto Adam also and his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins, and clothed them. And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and flaming swords, which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life.
Most of you have probably heard this story before. It's most likely one of the oldest stories there is. But we need to have it clear in our mind, because this is really the point of departure of today's subject, which is the concept of anxiety. I want to remind you of the Socratic irony in this book, because this is one of Søren's pseudonymous works. So you can't find Søren's name anywhere in the book. And so this book is written under the pseudonym Vigilius Haufniensis. So all of the opinions in this book should actually be contributed to Vigilius.
So here we begin. In the first chapter, there is discussion concerning the first sin and hereditary sin. Commonly, Adam is seen as the first sinner, the one who brought sin unto the world when he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But Søren noticed a problem with this conception.
Because Adam was created with the possibility to sin. Otherwise, he would have never eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and he would never have been kicked out from the Garden of Eden, and history would never have begun.
But the case was that he sinned when he ate the fruit, which means that sin must have existed before Adam, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to sin. So Adam can't be the one who brought sin into the world, since it already must have existed in order for him to commit sin.
The solution some had with this problem was actually to erase Adam from history. He was the beginning of history. But to Kierkegaard, that is a big problem, because Adam is supposed to be the very first man. So history began with him. So it's still a big problem, but Søren solves this in a very ingenious way.
For either, we are seeing Adam as an individual who brings sin into the world, and in this case being separate from the species. He is the beginning of history. Or we see him merely as part of the species, in which case sin must have existed before Adam. But Kierkegaard says no, he is actually both, and every person who comes after Adam and Eve should be seen in the same manner, both as individuals and parts of the species. So every individual is in a way always immersed in sin, and brings sin into the world.
Søren actually discusses two very distinct metaphysical propositions. Firstly, you have the traditional Greek deterministic worldview. And then, on the other hand, you have the Christian worldview, where every individual is seen as gods who knows good and evil and are able to commit sins.
For an example, in the classic Greek worldview, they thought that humans were only a plaything of the gods. For instance, they believed in the goddesses of fate, Clotho, the spinner, Lachesis, the alator, and Atropos, the inflexible, who spun the thread of destiny for every human being who was born.
There also was the philosopher Democritus, who really enforced this worldview in Greece. He thought that the whole world was consisted merely of atoms hitting each other. The important part of this thing is that in this worldview, humans are never considered free. We're solely made up of atoms hitting each other.
Another example from the Greek tradition is that according to the Aristotelian ethics, there is no such thing as sin, only competing virtues. And virtues should be considered as something positive. It is something good that you should do. And sin is the opposite, so it's considered as negative. It's something you should not do. And if you remember from the first episode on Kierkegaard, we were discussing the Socratic irony. Søren is not so fond of a positive kind of philosophy.
And then you have the Christian dogmatic worldview, where people are seen as free individuals, being able to sin, created by God in His image, which is the discussion for today. One mind-blowing thing about this book, at least for me, is that for a very long time I've always thought that if you believed in an all-powerful God, how can you be considered free? Shouldn't be like that He is actually deciding for you what you should do. But it's quite the opposite, because He enables us to sin. So He gives us our freedom. And this is the whole point. It's only when you believe in a materialistic worldview that you actually surrender your freedom. So Søren doesn't actually want to discuss which one of these world views are more correct than the other or better. He just wants to put them forward, and then he begins with the Christian dogma as a starting point. Here he says in his book, "The text that lies before you is put to the task of treating the concept of anxiety psychologically in the way that has the dogma of hereditary sin in mente and before the eyes."
So it is here that anxiety comes into the picture. According to Kierkegaard, anxiety is the very last state of mind a person finds himself before he commits a sin. So whenever a person gets confronted with its own possibility to sin, he will feel anxious.
This quote here is probably one of Søren's most famous ones, and it's the one that I really like. Here it goes. "Anxiety may be compared with dizziness. He whose eyes happens to look down the yawning abyss becomes dizzy. But what is the reason for this? It is just as much in his own eyes as in the abyss, for suppose he had not looked down. Hence, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, which emerges when the spirit wants to posit the synthesis, and freedom looks down to its own possibility, laying hold of finiteness to support itself." So think of it like this. You have something very important that you're going to do tomorrow. And all of a sudden, one of your friends calls you and want to hang out for drinks. At this instant, you're going to feel anxiety because you're faced with a decision. You have to make a decision whether you're going to stay at home or hang out with your friends for drinks and risking ruining the next day. So the important part about this is that if your friend never would have called, you would have never faced the decision and you would have never felt anxious.
This is a simplification of it all, because in Søren's view, the Christian dogma is necessary in order to consider us free, but it will help us move forward. Later, Søren goes on with a big philosophical discussion about time, a discussion that I will save for another episode. But another thing that I thought was really interesting in this book is this.
You're walking around and all of a sudden a memory appears in your head. At first it is a very good memory, but then you realize something that you did that was either bad or embarrassing. Then you start to feel anxious. For some, this might be considered anxiety for the past, but no, not according to Søren, because you can only feel anxious when you're posed with a decision, and you can't make a decision about the past. Your freedom is not involved. So what actually happens is that the reason why you feel anxious is to stop you from doing the same thing you did in the past in the future. So that's why you're feeling anxiety. So what about children then? Are they considered free in the same sense as adults? Well, not really. According to Kierkegaard, they are actually innocent, and innocence here is actually not knowing. They don't know what sin is, so they can't commit a sin because they don't have the knowledge yet, but they're still immersed in sin, which is important because otherwise they wouldn't be able to even get the knowledge of good and evil and being able to sin.
Here Søren says, the narrative in Genesis also gives the correct explanation of innocence. Innocence is ignorance. It is by no means the pure being of the immediate, but it is ignorance. The fact that ignorance, when viewed from without, is regarded as something defined in the direction of knowledge, is of no concern whatever to ignorance.
In his book, Søren actually discusses two formations of anxiety. One being anxiety for the good, and the second one being anxiety for evil.
Anxiety for the evil is basically when a person is living a good life, but tempted by sin and evil deeds. Here he says, the posited sin is indeed an annulled possibility, but it is also an unwarranted actuality, and as such, anxiety can relate to itself to it. Since sin is an unwarranted actuality, it is also to be negated. This work anxiety will undertake. Here is the playground of the ingenious sophistry of anxiety, while the actuality of sin holds one hand of freedom in its icy right hand, just as the commandant held Don Giovanni, the left hand, gesticulates with delusion, deception, and the eloquence of illusion.
Then you have the opposite of that, which Kierkegaard calls the anxiety for the good. And he also calls it the demonic. It's a little bit trickier to understand this one, but one part of it is that if you live a life full of sin, then you will feel anxious for good deeds. Because, think of it like this, the worst thing that could happen is that if God exists and you live in a life in sin, the good, which would be God, will punish you for an eternity in the next life.
Another part of the demonic, or anxiety for the good, is when a person surrenders his freedom, blames all his action on externalities. Here he says, "The demonic is anxiety about the good. In innocence, freedom was not posited as freedom. Its possibility was anxiety in the individual. In the demonic, the relation is reversed. Freedom is posited as unfreedom, because freedom is lost. Here again, freedom's possibility is anxiety. The difference is absolute, because freedom's possibility appears here in a relation to unfreedom, which is the very opposite of innocence, which is a qualification disposed towards freedom. The demonic is unfreedom that wants to close itself off. This, however, is and remains an impossibility."
Søren also points out that even though if you have surrendered your freedom with the demonic, you are still making a choice. So unfreedom is here still in the category of freedom. So this is a very similar point that also the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre makes. We are doomed to freedom, because not making a choice is still a choice. Here Søren says in his book, "This must constantly be claimed even though the demonic and the use of the language illusion, through the usage of such expressions about this condition, almost tempts one to forget that unfreedom is a freedom's phenomena, and thusly can't be explained through natural categories." I actually think that this is so relevant still today, because the scientific paradigm is pushing more and more a deterministic, materialistic worldview. And also, it becomes more and more common for people to explain or excuse people's behavior due to some social economic factors. I'm not talking against any of this. I mean, that is one worldview, but I want you to realize that the moment you excuse an individual for committing a sin, and you explain it by saying, oh, it was his social economic background, you're actually removing that person's own free will and individualism. You're telling him, oh, it's not your fault, it's just your background. So, we're getting close to the end here. Another big lesson for me, at least, with this book was that actually anxiety is a very important factor that you gotta have in order to move yourself forward in life. Because if you think about it, the only way not to feel anxious is to stay at home, stay in bed, and not try anything new at all and not meeting anyone. So, anxiety is very important. The deeper the anxiety, the better. Here Kierkegaard says in his book, "The one who has learned to feel the anxiety the right way, he have learned the greatest. If man were an animal or an angel, she would not be able to feel anxious, because she is a synthesis. She can feel anxiety, and the deeper the anxiety, the greater the man." So, here I leave you all. I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe you learned something new. Also, you guys know the deal by now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you got any value out of this. And also, support me on Patreon. It would help me a lot. It would enable me to be able to put out episodes more frequently. Also, I will only debit you on Patreon whenever I release a new episode, so it's not a monthly fee. So, take care everyone. I hope you have a good one. See ya.